This is Center Stage, putting lawyers in the spotlight by highlighting attorneys and other industry experts to help take your law firm to the next level. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Center Stage. I am your host, John Henson, and this week we are talking about going solo, and I am joined by attorney Jeremy Baker. Jeremy, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So yeah, I think a lot of attorneys out there, maybe you're working in a bigger law firm and you've kind of always thought about, well, what is it like to open my own firm and just kind of go at this on my own? And so Jeremy has been where you are, and he has taken that journey from a big law firm to opening up his solo practice. And so he is going to be the perfect person to hear from today. And so, yeah, before we dive in, Jeremy, why don't you just kind of introduce yourself and let people know a little bit about you?
Sure thing. Well, I'm a construction lawyer in Chicago, which is a little bit different than real estate law. I help people create buildings. It's great because it's transactional, but it's also dispute resolution. But what's I think most exciting recently for me is that I've been on my own for about a year and a half now. Of my almost 19 years of practice, 17 of them have been in the biggest big law firms, the AmLaw 100, AmLaw 200. And most of the last 15 years, I was at Schiff Hardin, a large law firm based in Chicago, where I was a partner in the construction law group. It was a wonderful job that I am still surprised I left, because there was no real, impetus to leave. I'm kind of surprised, frankly, that I made the decision to go solo. I don't know that I ever would have seen myself do that. But my wife, who's a lawyer as well, left Big Law 10 years ago to go solo herself. And so I had a little bit of time to watch her over the last decade as we went from no kids to 4 kids, grow a firm. And really, what got me down this path was about 4 years ago, I found the Purple Apple podcast app on my iPhone while I was waiting to have the car washed. And I started to play around, and I found all these really interesting, podcasts. And I learned that there's this community of people out there that are trying to, do better for themselves and their clients. And I kind of fell down the rabbit hole of listening to everyone I could get my hands on. And for the first year or so, it was, mentally, I'm going to help my wife. Because for me, there were all these reasons why I couldn't possibly go solo. My practice wouldn't work that way. But slowly the pendulum kind of swung where it was in the middle, and I overcame those objections. And I said, I think I actually could do this, but there's no impetus. Slowly but surely over the span of the next year or so, I said, you know what? Not only can I do it, it's something that I have to do. And I'm surprised to have taken that journey because I really did love my other job.
Awesome. So yeah, so for people for attorneys who have just kind of spent their entire careers in a bigger law firm, what are some of the differences between working in a big law firm versus just, kind of working for yourself, having a solo practice?
Well, I feel a little bit like the goldfish that got out of the bowl. It's this wonderful, terrifying freedom. I'm the personality type that I'm surprised to say really sort of needed that, in an E-Myth sort of sense. I think big law firm attorneys are more technicians, head down. I didn't realize that I had other interests in running the business and doing more of the marketing. But, getting back to your question, though, the difference is, setting aside the obvious ones. I mean, boy, I miss the support, the technical support, and I miss the camaraderie, of having 400 other lawyers I'm working with. And, certainly over the last, 15 years, going to some of the partner meetings and socializing with my partners at the firm was extremely rewarding. And I was part of a very special group of lawyers within the firm, our construction law group. Setting aside all that stuff, which I think might be a little more obvious, I think that when you're in law, what you're doing is you're learning to sort of maneuver within a system and to play the game. Whereas with solo law, you're creating the system. And so for me, it has been exciting to have the opportunity to try to think about where to spend my time. Everybody in the big law firm, is generally a good lawyer, but those who stick are the ones that know how to play the game.
Right.
And to keep clients happy and to keep their partners happy and to keep the institution happy while trying to grow their career. There's a lot of constraints there that I'm not sure that I was entirely aware of at the time. Now that I'm on my own, trying to figure out how to best use my time and figuring out what sort of ideas I might want to implement, to streamline my practice, to better use technology, to scale, to market, I get to create that myself, and it's exhilarating.
Yeah. So, what were some of the biggest reasons that you just decided to leave a big law and just go out on your own?
Well, part of it is, I think I'm maybe about halfway through my career, not quite. I'm about 20 years in, and I was able to look forward and sort of see the future a little bit, and it wasn't a bad one by any means. I mean, I had wonderful camaraderie and respect, and lots of support on most things that I wanted to do, and there's a lot of benefits. I had some back surgery a couple years ago where I had to miss 4 months work. It was no problem. They didn't bat an eye. They didn't reduce my partner draws, and that was, wonderful. But I also could kind of see that the way that the firm marketed itself and marketed its groups and then marketed the individuals was a system. And, it was a system that made a lot of sense for the institution. And going along with my role as it was envisioned had a lot of benefits for me. I mean, I had a job probably for the rest of my career, but it was limiting. It was, there's a lot of things that I can do on the transactional side that didn't make a lot of sense for the firm to highlight in the way that my marketing plan fit within the firm's marketing plan, because I was generally considered to be a good litigator. And, looking at the way that we were going out and sort of hunting in packs and getting business, a lot of that was, a bunch of people within my group that had very specialized abilities. For me, being a litigator, when we would go on a pitch, my boss would turn to the potential client and say, ask them how many times, they've done this, because Jeremy's done it 15 times. Which would get us the business, and it was great. But unless I wanted to do exactly that thing for the rest of my career, which wasn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, I was going to have to think about doing something different. And because I do have that transactional bone in my, in my body and the ability to do that work, I saw advantages from a marketing standpoint from playing that up that wouldn't have meshed well with what the firm wanted me to do. And so for me to have the sort of life that I wanted for myself and my 4 young kids, the oldest of which is 10 years old, I kind of said that there might be a better way for me to put myself out there in the market, to use some digital marketing, newsletters, social media, things that probably wouldn't have flown necessarily if I tried to do them within the system, within the big law firm.
Yeah. So, there's, say there's an attorney out there, they're thinking about leaving, doing what you did, and open up their own firm. What sorts of things should they be thinking about? What sorts of things, should they be considering? I mean, was there any part of the process that maybe caught you off guard that you hadn't considered that maybe you wish you did?
Yeah, it's funny because I hear all these podcasts of lawyers that leapt out on their own. And back when I was still at the big law firm, that was what I was searching for more than anything. I mean, it was like Christmas morning for me if I could wake up and find a podcast episode about somebody who went solo, because I wanted to know, what it was like. And I marvel at a lot of them. They said, well, I just got mad one day and my, approach is very different. I'm a cautious risk taker, and I studied the problem of, how do you do this without going bankrupt and, losing the house that your 4 kids live in, for a long time. And as I mentioned, it wasn't like I really even knew I was doing it. I was really thinking about how to help my wife's law firm. And then I was kind of surprised about halfway through to say, wait a minute, maybe this has some application for me. But I spent years thinking about what it would look like to do this. And, I do think that there are a few things that leapt out as particularly important to me. And maybe the most important thing is something I heard somebody say right around the time that I was about to give my notice. And they said that the only thing anybody will ever remember about you is how you left. Mm. And, I was at my last job for almost 15 years. And to this day, I think that a lot of people, when they think about my name, I'm the guy that, had the moxie to go solo, and they don't necessarily remember a whole lot else about my 15 years there. And so I thought a lot about how to clean up my files and get them in a good place to hand them off so that nobody would be burdened by my leaving. And I delayed and I worked strategically to communicate within the firm to make sure that the people who were good to me and helped boost me up didn't feel like this was an indictment of them, and on really good terms is important. It's wonderful that I have great relationships with my former partners. A bunch of them got bottles of wine from me for days. They send me work. I still get invited back to the the group luncheons, and so leaving on good terms is essential. And whether you're deciding in a day to run out the door, or whether you're thinking about leaving for more for a longer period, leaving on good terms is, I think, very important. Another thing I think is the contact list, and whether you use a CRM, and some of the technology that I do, getting that together is extremely important because, when you sell professional services, it's not a good idea to keep what you do a secret. So, figuring out whatever tactics you're going to use to get the attention of everybody in your world to let them know that you're out there and staying top of mind, you got to get that together. And then I would say that, outsourcing in vendors is something that you should do if you can. I was faced with a decision when I leapt out of my own, without, I'm not a trust fund baby. I this could have failed economically for me big time. I did not leave with enough of a book of business to really sustain myself. And so I was making a little bit of a leap of faith, and I still decided that I didn't want to be in my QuickBooks. I wanted to outsource that. I didn't want to be answering my phones. I didn't want to be in charge of my website. I didn't want to be in charge of my newsletter because I needed to double down on getting the work and keeping the clients happy. And so I modeled what I thought the sort of debt I was going to need to go into, making assumptions about revenue, making assumptions about where the revenue would come from, high, low, what would I do if I ran out of cash, to try to satisfy myself that this is the sweet spot for me of, even though it's a little bit nerve-wracking to go into debt, I'm gonna invest in the vendors. And then, 4 or 5 months from now, if I haven't hit the projections along the way that I had modeled for revenue, I was gonna be prepared to make a change. And so I had really taken a good look at numbers. And I'm not a numbers guy. I'm one of those guys that was very disappointed to learn that going to law school is not a good way to hide from numbers. But, I looked at all of the things that I wanted to buy, and I learned about a lot of them from listening to podcasts, and I listed them out on a spreadsheet. And, on the other axis was, 12 columns for the 12 months where I projected when would the expenses hit and when did I think revenue would pick up, and how deep in the hole was I going to go for the first 6 months. And if I needed to, could I draw on the line of credit? And I was kind of surprised that I was able to sort of model this in a way that, even though I was getting nervous as I did go into debt and things were starting slowly, it was consistent with what I anticipated. So I was able to take a breath and feel good about it, and not having to mess around with things that I could outsource has been the best decision that I've made, because I've been able to focus on content creation, being top of mind, and bringing in the work and doing an excellent job for my clients.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just one of the biggest things is, you, by outsourcing all of that, you created more billable hours for yourself. You created more capacity for yourself to actually get that revenue and to build a successful firm a little bit faster than if you had maybe been a little stubborn and just figured you had to just handle it all yourself. Yeah. For like any law students out there who might be listening, I know you are just one man with one opinion. It's obviously not gospel, but in your opinion, should maybe a law student, should they just start a firm on their own right out of college, or should they maybe work in big law for a couple of years and kind of get some experience? What do you think is the best course there?
Well, I think that it really depends on the kind of person you're talking about. I would be lying to you if I told you that I don't stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, I have taught construction law at John Marshall Law School in Chicago. I've published more book chapters than I could count, and I have had those opportunities because of the people who mentored me and trained me. I would not be where I am or who I am if it wasn't for the fact that I had these wonderful mentors who continue to play a very big role in my life. So I am not down at all on getting the big law experience or really, small law, working with other people, training, because the first 3 years of law practice are brutal. I mean, when you finish your third year, you've generally seen everything once, and it's a relief to say, okay, I've done a motion like this. Let me find the example and take a breather. My first 3 years, I was doing plaintiff side contingency litigation where I was filing lawsuits over 7 states, getting on the airplane in the morning, going to take a deposition, in the afternoon. And, you learn that when you sue four defendants in another city, the other lawyers all know each other. And I showed up some 20-something-year-old kid, and it was brutal. And so I had, a heck of the first 3 years. I wouldn't have wanted to try to do that again, without people who would have an open door that I could walk into and seek out advice. So leaping out on your own right away is something that I don't know whether or not it would be a good idea for everyone. There is the upside to getting some of that experience. However, we are in a different world right now. I could not have started my law firm 5 years ago without the technology I rely on now, because it didn't exist. And so, whereas if I leapt out, in 2002 when I graduated law school, I was still dealing in a world of paper and getting paper cuts and, actually bait stamping documents with a physical stamp. Yeah. Now the technology that's out there, it blows my mind. I mean, I use CRMs and practice management software, and I'm trying to string everything together so they communicate through APIs. And, I've got my systems, and it's a work in progress. It's not perfect. But right now, if you were to leap out there as a solo right away, you have the ability to network using video. You've got the ability to write and speak, to create your own content. You don't need somebody to give you a podium to stand on. You can have a YouTube channel. And so a lot of the hurdles that existed when I started have fallen down. And I think it's much, much, much easier to go solo now than it was, 20 years ago when I came out. What I would say to any young lawyer that's thinking about making this leap is pick your practice area very, very carefully. Okay. Yeah. Because what I didn't realize when I was in law school, and this is one of the things that I've consistently given as advice to young lawyers, is everybody says, well, what's your practice area going to be, when you're in law school? And to me, that's almost irrelevant. I think that it's more along the lines of, are you going to have a client base that is extremely hard to attain? Or are you going to have a client base where anybody you walk past on the street could be a client? Take my wife. Her business is estate planning for young families. She only, services people that are pushing kids around in a stroller. She could walk up and down Michigan Avenue in Chicago, and every single person she passes is a potential client for her. Now, for me, because I help, institutional owners like hospitals and universities build buildings, I help real estate developers build skyscrapers. I help architects and engineers design big projects. I could walk up and down Michigan Avenue all day long and maybe once come into contact with one person that would have the ability to make a hiring decision for me. And so if you're a young lawyer, you might think, if you're going out on your own, more about having a practice that's what I refer to as retail. It's consumer to consumer. My wife has clients everywhere she looks, and that is a lot easier. What I do is definitely harder in terms of developing the business. And then on the far end of the extreme end would be maybe like an antitrust attorney. I mean, I think probably Google only has one of those. Yeah, I don't know that you'd want to try to compete for that work coming right out. So picking your practice area carefully and trying to cast your line in a pond where there's a lot of fish is a really important thing to do when you are coming out, especially if you're thinking about leaping out on your own.
Awesome. So kind of a small pivot here. Speaking of, solo lawyers, one of the things that I think you do is really cool is that you started something called Operation Palm Tree, which is all about kind of just helping solo lawyers. So talk for a few minutes about what Operation Palm Tree is, how it helps people out there, and maybe how people can get in touch to get some help from you?
Well, the name of it has a little bit of a story. I mean, I went to school in Santa Barbara, and I lived in San Diego for a lot of my life, and I love the beach. And I love sitting under a palm tree. And, when I was sitting around at the, big law firm, working away, doing what I needed to do, and my wife would call and ask me a question about, my thought about maybe going solo, I couldn't say, hey, yeah, when I leave here, this is what I'm going to do. So our code name was Operation Palm Tree. Operation Palm Tree was the code name for, the idea that I might leave the big firm that my wife and I used. And I am surprised to learn how genuinely interested I am in things like law practice management and marketing and, systems and budgeting. And I am a music guy. Like I get up, I like to listen to some music, but these days I get up and I want to see what kind of podcasts are out there, because I get my best ideas from listening to other people, ruminate over issues that I had never even thought about. And because I found this to be so interesting, when COVID hit, a lot of, because I leapt out 6 months before, COVID roughly hit. I had a lot of lawyers who were scared for their jobs reach out to me and say, what does it look like to do what you do? And I was giving them a lot of assistance. And I thought to myself, maybe I should have a side gig where I would be essentially the open door, the open door that I enjoyed in my many years of big law. Hey, I want to pick somebody's brain. I had that resource. So Operation Palm Tree is, a side gig consultancy where my wife and I are involved in. The idea is that if you are a lawyer, whether you're a big law attorney that doesn't know anything about how to set up a website or think about, search engine optimization or newsletters or anything, you can come and you can talk to somebody that, left big law and thought about those things. Or if you're a young lawyer that doesn't know your practice area and wants to strategize about, what does it look like to go out on my own? Maybe if you have no other options, how do you budget? How do you, think about engagement letters and conflict checks, and how do you run your systems? And what would a lawyer with, almost 20 years of experience do if you were in their shoes? I wanted to be sort of the open door for the industry, for people who are, thinking about launching on their own. And so it's a side gig consultancy that is available to help other lawyers think through some of these things that I'm so interested in. Although I will, make a confession that because my law practice has been weathering COVID much better than I anticipated, I'm putting a lot more time into the law practice, lots of videos, lots of content. It's aspirational for me to record a lot of videos and put them on my website, operationpalmtree.com, and have various packages and stuff like that. That's not come to fruition yet because I've been focusing so much on my law practice, but I am definitely available as a resource for people in the industry who are thinking about making an entrepreneurial leap.
Awesome. So yeah, that is operationpalmtree.com. And so just want to wrap up the show here, Jeremy. If you had one piece of advice for the attorneys out there listening, what would it be?
You can do it. That's what I wanted to hear. I logged on to all those podcasts where I heard lawyers leaping out on their own. And, that they come from every background, they're every kind of lawyer, every stripe. And I just wanted to hear them say that, I did it and you could do it too. And, I'm not discounting the fact that I have certain advantages from having practiced in the same geographic region and the same practice area for a long time. And I've got the connections that I've made. However, you can do it. If you are thinking about making this leap, you can do it. It's just a question of how much you want it and how much you're willing to try to think about what success looks like. When COVID hit, and I was thinking about my wife's practice, even though she was, too engaged with other client matters to really do this, it occurred to me that a young lawyer could just say, I'm a estate planning lawyer and I'm going to do free estate planning, for, all the teachers or all the firefighters. And in Illinois, there's a power of attorney form. It's statutory. It's written by the legislature. You just download it and fill it out. It takes 10 seconds, and enterprising young lawyer could put themselves all over Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and do a newsletter, and they could basically help all these people to get this power of attorney form, and it's literally downloaded off the internet and fill it out. And so any young lawyer that is thinking about doing this, or really any lawyer that's thinking about doing this, if you're willing to just think outside the box a little bit about how to be generous and do work that might help people, I think that you can do it. And if anybody is a little more experienced and they're thinking about going out on their own, maybe leaving an established practice, there is a book called The Icarus Deception by Seth Godin that was very instrumental in me deciding that I needed to make a change. Another book by Seth Godin that's really good to read is The Dip. And The Dip is something that anybody should think about reading if they're coming out on their own. But young lawyers in particular, I would say. Go on to Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from, and subscribe to the 50, 60 great podcasts like the 2 that Spotlight Branding does. And, help people who have been there before issue Spot, because you can do it if you're committed to making it happen.
Awesome. Well, that was fantastic. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to everyone out there who is listening, who continues to listen. Rate, review us on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else that you're consuming the show. And that, I think, is going to do it for us today. Be sure to check out Operation Palm Tree at operationpalmtree.com if you're looking to just get some advice and some direction. Jeremy is, like he said, he's an open door to help you out in any way he can, point you in any direction that he thinks can help you out. Jeremy, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Awesome. We will see you next week. Thanks for listening. To learn more, go to spotlightbranding.com/center stage.